This is the Tree of Life, Season 5, Chapter 8. In this episode, we will be integrating our discussions in this season with different kinds of territoriality. To start off, spatial territoriality manifests as a projection of action corresponding to particular expectations of another. That is to say, the oxytocin release corresponding to the meeting of expectations is one-sided. Archetypal territoriality is linked to reciprocation by preferential expectation matching. Which is to say, that non-linear intersections are created by emotional coupling between two individuals corresponding to reciprocation between two individuals, at the expense of another. In other words, non-linearity is the product of an oxytocin-mediated genetic synchronicity, which is the product of epigenetic convergence caused by reciprocation. In other words, archetypal territoriality, that is, consolidated territoriality, is consolidated through a linking of two individuals in a reciprocal relationship at the expense of any other individual. This linking manifests as nonlinearity, or through nonlinearity, as a gradation of synchronicity between the reciprocal pair and any other individual interacted with. Spatial territoriality impedes this preferential expectation matching, or reciprocation, by compelling expectation matching in the absence of coupling between the corresponding individuals. To be clear then, archetypal consensuality creates an oxytocin-mediated homeostatic equilibrium, because it is reliant on a two-sided reciprocal relationship built on oxytocin release. It is founded upon preferential expectation matching between the emotionally coupled individuals at the expense of the outgroup. That is to say, that the preferential expectation matching within the in-group partners is at the expense of the outgroup, generating a gradient of epigenetic synchronicity. This is to be distinguished from the tit-for-tat strategy of a lineal line, wherein such a relationship lacks consolidation, merely relying on substitution in the place of coupling. Likely, this is because the tit-for-tat relationship of a lineal line is constructed upon cortisol release instead of reciprocal oxytocin release. All of this is to say that nonlinearity is about a gradient of reciprocation amongst an in-group and an out-group manifesting as a gradient of genetic synchronicity, preferential expectation matching between two coupled individuals at the expense of some outgroup. This is interesting because it shows us that path jumping, that is, the lateral action corresponding to the convergence of a linear path with nonlinearity, is about bringing the outgroup into the nonlinear path via reciprocation. We also see that higher cortisol levels are linked to less territoriality, that is, greater non-reciprocation created through othering as a member of an outgroup. In other words, higher cortisol levels are the product of a linking of these coupled in groups, reliant upon the exclusion of some other. That is to say, preferential expectation matching within these coupled in groups, at the expense of some othered individual. That's the end of the podcast for today.